Hi, welcome back to Wallflowers. So, as the title of the video says, the day I got arrested. Now, I've only ever been arrested one time. This is the time, 6 years ago. I've never been arrested in my entire life other than this one occasion. The reason I got arrested that particular day is because I lay in a road for 12 hours with my arm in a metal tube attached by a carabiner to another gentleman who lay attached to me for 12 hours in a road. There was actually four other sets of two people, three other sets of two people, so there was 8 of us that lay there for 12 hours, all in the same scenario, arms in metal tubes attached to each other with a clip-on carabiner. The reason we did that was to conscientiously object against fracking in the UK, fracking anywhere really. And we did that to become human obstacles to stop vehicles, trucks entering the fracking site. 6 years ago, time has just flown. Now, if I can just give you a little backstory of how I actually got to that point. So in 2013, a friend of mine kept posting posts about anti-fracking on Facebook. And for the first 50 or so posts, I'd literally just scrolled past it, not took much interest and not read it. And one particular day, it just caught my attention and I was drawn to read it. And it had an impact on me. I saw how polluted the water would be in the water table. I saw how greedy the government would be with our water, our land, and the effects it would have on us, and the lies that were being told at the time about how we would have cheaper fuel by allowing this process to carry on, how our gas prices would dramatically increase. Well, of course, we all knew that was a lie. Decrease, sorry. We all knew that was a lie. We all knew, this wasn't for the benefit of the masses. We knew any gas at the time that we believed may have come from it would not be just to save the general population. So I started looking more deeply into it, the fracturing of the ground to release these gases and how dangerous that would be in the immediate vicinity of where that was taking place. And we visited Mr. Wallflowers came home and I was totally engrossed. I'd been reading this for must be 3-4 hours. And I'd gone from post to post and link to link, and I was building up information, and I was trying to research a little bit. As I say, it had gone on for quite a few hours. And Mr. Wallflowers came home and he asked me, what was I doing? And I started in the broken terminology that I had at the time and how I was just grasping a little bit of understanding in that short time. And he was quite taken aback and he said, wow, how long has this been going on? So I wasn't sure at that point. So we decided the very next day, we were going to travel to Manchester. And it was a site there that fracking was being set up and was proposed for. And it was a site there called Barton Moss. So off we went. Little bit of excitement really to discover something new, to educate ourselves, and quite annoyed, not quite angry, but annoyed that there was no mention of the dangers of this process. And we hadn't really come across it. We hadn't been hearing this word fracking around us. We hadn't been made aware of it. So we visited the site and there were just everyday people there. Some were what you would call hippies with braids in the hair, some were just everyday working people, some were mums, dads, people with dogs, you know, just general population there really. But a lot of the people were quite grubby. They'd been living in tents on the roadside with no amenities for going to the toilet, going to get washed. And we'd heard that some of these people had been staying there months and months on end without going home for a break. And everyone was so friendly, just having a chat with us and asking us where we'd come from and how we'd heard about fracking and trying to share information with us. And they'd set up a food store, they'd built a little hut. They'd set up a food and a water store, and they were asking for donations from the public, if anyone could donate some tin food and anything that was available, possibly if it was available some food for dogs or cats that were around the site, and clothing or dry bedding, and it was just if it was possible. It wasn't a cry out, it wasn't a demand, it was just if at all possible, this is the kind of thing that we would need. And we were so eager to help, because everyone was so welcoming and inviting to us. And gradually, slowly but surely, we'd start to go up once a week. We put shout outs in our local area. Would anyone like to help the fracking site? So the protesters there, the anti-frackers, and a lot of people in our immediate area were like ourselves. They'd never heard of fracking before, didn't know what it was. And I started to share posts on my social media, and people were startled. People were like, how have you heard of this? You know, what is it? So I started sharing videos, and people locally would start watching them, and if I was out and about, they'd stop me and have in-depth conversations. And these are just normal everyday folk who live in my community, you know. And it was fabulous that people wanted to hear about it because they'd never come across it before. So we started taking donations up. People started giving us things to take up for them, whether it be duvets, pillows, bits of dry food, herbs, tins, you name it, and we'd run them up in the van. They'd be so thankful when we got there, and we started to build friendships bit by bit and got to know people. There'd be musicians there, writers, poets. One guy was studying for a master's degree. Some were trying to get into politics. Some were just doing everyday, you know, factory work. Some were carers in the society. Some were travellers. Just a whole range of the public, basically, a good mixture. And we built several friendships with different people. It somehow felt like a summer of love, you know. Everyone was happy, cheerful, always pleased to see you. Nice, welcoming, quite long hugs, and it was lovely. It was a beautiful environment. We didn't really get to spend a lot of time at Barton Moss, where we'd actually class ourselves as protesters or anything like that. We were actually visitors who would try and help support the people that were there. And we started just going just before Christmas of 2013. Just after Christmas, so it was 2013 to the beginning of 2014. And people had stayed there all over the Christmas period, and it was quite a heavy, cold winter. Young girls had stayed, I say young girls, you know, 18, 19, 20s, all the way through the Christmas and New Year period. So we were trying to take up scarves and hats and gloves and warm socks and little things that we were able to get to help and support them, and they were so grateful for them. To make this shorter for the video, we did that for quite a while. Not long after that, I actually opened my cafe, went to work in the cafe for 2 years, basically, wasn't it? And I'd try and support on social media, I'd try and still send parcels up, I'd go to meetings, or we'd go on marches, and we fit what we could in. around our work life and our family life. And then as I had to close the cafe in 2017, beginning of 2017, the site in PNR, which is between Preston and Blackpool, was getting more prominent. The fracking company there, Quadrilla, were actually stating at the time that this frack site would be the landmark fracking pad in England and would be the biggest one in England, and they were going to go all out and make this the most major fracking site in the UK. They were planning 4 different boreholes at that time. By this time we were gradually trying to educate ourselves in lay people's terms of what we could grasp. We're not scientists, we're not professing to be, but we were actually staunchly against fracking at this point. Because I had closed my business and I was no longer working at that point, I decided I was actually going to attend on a more regular basis and be protester stroke conscientious objector. So basically I wasn't doing anything that you'd call activism. I'd attend the site, we'd sit or stand outside the main gate, we'd hold placards, we'd talk to each other, we'd amass a group of people, and we'd make our presence known, and basically make it visible that we were against fracking. And we built a community, and there was quite a lot of people there that first year. It was in the hundreds, you know, and there'd be lots and lots of people there. Come March days or days that there was an event on, there'd be thousands, you know, absolutely lots and lots of people would turn up to bring their families, they'd go on marches, there'd be food and community, there'd be prayer groups, there'd be singing groups, there'd be lots of different activities going on, entertainment, and people would just pull together really, you know, nobody would be left without. There'd be enough food to go around, there'd be, you know, everyone was pleasant. Again, I'd call it another summer of love, you know, the community spirit and the bonding and the coming together of everyone in agreement that they didn't agree with the fracking. It was a thing to behold. It was a beautiful feeling, you know.
They had 3 protest camps there.
Yeah, there was 3 separate protest camps. At first there was only one major protest camp where people would sleep on the camp, and the rest of the time people would just either stay awake and sit up in chairs or stand up or lay on the floor and just be a vision really outside the gates. And eventually somebody built like a wooden shed, and we could actually use that as a marker post, and basically people started to keep logbooks then of registrations of vehicles that would enter into the site and leave the site, and people started to educate themselves and know the pieces of equipment that were being dropped off at the site, so they know how far along, because by this point we'd learned there'd actually been other sites. So as well as Barton Moss, there'd been Balcombe down south, and some of the active protesters had actually been at these other previous sites as well, and they were becoming wise to what these pieces of equipment were that were entering site. So they were able to keep a written log, which vehicles, which registrations, which companies, which equipment is on site, and people were becoming savvy and learning, and you could actually see into the site and you'd be able to say, well, that piece is called this, this is a worker rig, and this is a bore driller, and people would know, you know, the names of equipment. So we'd be able to say where we're up to with the structure on the site. So I gradually, as I say, this hut was built, so we'd use that as a information centre, and that'd be where everything would be traceable from. To be this other camp where people would sleep in tent girts, bring caravans, different sites. There was another site that was just caravan based, and people would sleep in caravans, and they were all just a mile or so within the region, so they could walk there and back every day. And then eventually, towards the end of we call it the fight, but the objection to the site, there was actually another camp built, which didn't actually last very long, but it was a visible presence for a short while. So it was quite an active area, you know. And all of the time, I started visiting at first on a daily, well, for day visits and stay as long as I could. And Mr. Wallflowers would drop me off in the morning, come back and pick me up in the evening after he'd finished work. And then I decided I want longer stays. So I would stay for 3 days at a time. So I would sit in a chair, and if I could manage to have a doze or have a sleep, then I'd take advantage and do that. But a lot of the time you'd be running on adrenaline and you'd barely get any shut eye at all, and you'd be communicating, looking after everyone's welfare, logging and tracing what's coming in and out of the site, and just basically living camp life, you know.
Brutality of the police and the security.
There was a lot of brutality with the police and the security, and to sit back and watch that, because at first I wouldn't be integrated into that kind of thing. I'd actually just be a visible presence on the sidelines. But some people would actively try and stop vehicles from entering. So they would chain lock arms or do anything that was possible, put furniture in front of the site and obstacles. So police would actually come in vast numbers. You know, we'd constantly be counting how many police were visible, how many Black Maria police vans were there, how many PLOs were there. So the PLOs were police liaison officers, and they'd wear a different colour bib. So basically their job was to try and communicate and converse. And at first you think, oh, these are quite nice, but what they were doing, they're information gatherers, so they're trying to place you, who you are, know your name, know where you are, and basically have a backlog of information on you. And the common thing was, you know, other people would be saying don't talk to them, whatever, whereas I'm not the type of person not to talk to people, you know. So I quickly learned not to give me name. I never had anything to hide. I'm not a criminal. I wasn't an activist. I was just making my presence known. I wanted to be, we are a visual representation of objecting to what this is. And over time I gathered that wasn't enough, because these vehicles were still rolling in. The fracking pad was eventually built. One borehole was completely drilled, and they did frack. They did do the frack. Now, they ruined it for themselves, because there was a traffic light system, and if the earth tremors were over 1.5, they had to stop. The frack that they did actually went over what they were legally allowed to do, so they broke the traffic light system, so they got stopped because of that. We really wanted to stop them with our presence, but they actually faltered on their own commitment. And as I'd watched, there'd be people climbing on top of vehicles, and work would have to stop for the day because somebody was on a vehicle, and that vehicle wasn't allowed to move because of the safety of the person on top. And sometimes that would prevent vehicle movement in the roads coming or going for 6-7 hours of the day. Now, sometimes police would block off 2 roads to instigate drivers being angry at people who had climbed on top of a vehicle. They only really ever needed to close one road off, but they'd instigate and close both roads off to cause a kerfuffle in the community, so the people who were trying to travel down the road would be angry at the person on top of the vehicle because they'd want to get home or they'd want to get to work or wherever they were headed in the vehicles. And the police would play mind games and they'd cause controversy between the protesters, and they'd step the game up and they'd get aggressive and they'd pick people up and throw them on the ground, throw them in the bushes. You know, there were many an injury where the police had actually stepped it up to cause provocation and things. And I'm not saying that some of the protesters didn't do it, because it was 6 to 1, half a dozen of the other, you know. And I'd sit and observe this and I'd think, I got to the point where I knew I had to do something. And not being a criminal and not being an aggressive person, having a family at home, you know, I'd already discussed with my family, did they agree with me attending this site? Had 2 children, obviously, teenage years, and I actually sat down and said, look, Mum wants to do this, and I'm not going to be here for 3 days a week. You know, I'd go for 3 days, come home 2-3 days, sort everything out for family life. I knew Mr. Wallflowers was more than capable of looking after everything here, and then I'd go back for another 3 days. And when it come to this time where I was thinking, I need to do something more than what I'm doing, and watching people lay down in the road with their arm in a metal tube, and I'm seeing that it does actually hinder progress on the site. And I'm thinking to myself, I want to do that, but I don't want a criminal record. I don't want it to hinder me should I work in the future, hinder anything by causing a criminal record for me. And I pondered over it for a long time, because I've never seen myself as a criminal. I've never seen myself as having to go against the law, having to do such a big act, you know. And it was turmoil for me. I had to do it. Anyway, we'd all, there was a consensus, people were all going to meet at one of the camps. And it just so happened to be the time where I was internally trying to deal with that myself. And people were saying, we want to step it up, we want to do more lock-ons, and the lock-on is the act of putting yourself in the metal tube with the carabiner and locking onto each other and preventing the vehicle going in. And there was must have been 100 people or more there that day, and we all kind of split into groups and were having conversations between ourselves. Would you like to provide food for people if they did a lock-on? Would you do the sanitary side and help people toilet in that position, so there'd be bowls provided or bottles for men and different things, so they could do what they needed to do and not come out of the shackles basically and stay in situ. And everybody just decided which group they were going to be in. And I remember looking at a lady, and we caught eye contact with each other and we held the gaze for quite a while. Now this lady was actually in the Labour Party, not notoriously in the Labour Party. She was in the bottom rungs of the Labour Party, and she was quite active politically, and a mild-tempered lady, and I kind of liked her. We held a stare, and I kind of heard and felt she was thinking and doing the same that I was doing. And we must have locked a stare for about 2 or 3 minutes. And it was a knowing that we were both actually going to do this lock-on thing, you know, and we both had an innate fear of not knowing what the consequences would be and the legal procedure, and just the knowing that in our hearts we knew it was the right thing to do. Anyway, that passed, but you know, that knowing and remembering locking that stare with that lady, we discussed it a couple of years later, and she remembers it as much as I remember it, and she remembered it in exactly the same way. It was a heart and mind feeling that we both felt exactly the same. It was such a strange experience to go through. Anyway, she did a lock-on at a different point, and I did the lock-on at this stage. she actually changed from the Labour Party and she actually went in to be a member of the Green Party, which is a party I don't really agree with. Not that any of the parties are really anything I agree with anymore, but that's a different video. But yeah, and that's what we did. So 4 o'clock the next morning, we all got there on time. Different people brought the pieces of equipment that were needed. We decided what we wanted to do, and all of a sudden, out of a vehicle came this two-seater settee couch, a red settee couch, and other people were locking on through a metal tube, through beer barrels and through contraptions to make it much more difficult to gain access to the metal tube in the Caribbean. There was always something else around it. And I was asked, did I want to be on the settee lock-on? So it was a bright red two-seater settee. And the guy I did it with, his name was Lee. He was one side of the settee and I was the other side of the settee, and we had, through the base of the settee was a big metal tube and this Caribbean. So people might know it as like what you clip onto a dog chain and do something like that, so it's a piece you open and close. And this kind of went onto a link chain that we both had, and we carabined onto each other through this metal tube, through the base of the settee.
But in the tube there'd be concrete and stuff.
Yeah, so all kinds of concrete, all kinds of different things. So it was very difficult for them to remove us. It'd have to be cut out, that's right. Anyway, we placed ourselves down. We both had a roll mat underneath us, cushioned clothing. And the community came around us, provided breakfast. I'd say we lay down about 4 o'clock in the morning. We were given breakfast. We were looked after toiletry wise. Given drinks. People would come and have a chat with you. People would be live streaming and taking photographs. Lots and lots of things. And eventually, I think it was about 8-9 o'clock in the morning, the police arrived. It was noticeable no vehicles were going to get in that day. The press were there. There was different things going on. I think BBC News were there. There was a few different things there. Mr. Wallflowers had actually gotten up from home and gone to work, and he put a post on Facebook saying, really strange feeling this morning. He said, I'm going to work as usual, but no, my wife is going to be arrested at some point. He said, but we've talked about it, we're in agreement and it has to be done. So that love and support, and somebody brought it to me and read it to me, so it was an age on that I had family support. Yeah, so I say 12 hours later, I actually needed to go to the toilet for more than just passing water, and I actually agreed to unlock. So I'd done 12 hours, the bulk of the day was over. I didn't really think any vehicles were coming in for the rest of the day. And I was the first to leave the lock-on out of all the 8 people, which I didn't really want to do, but I'd done what I'd set out to do. So I unlocked and I was allowed to go to the toilet. I was then arrested, taken to the police station, put in a cell. I was looked after, I was fed, I was toileted, I was looked after medically. I was released, I think it was about 6 hours later, and then I had to wait for the court case, and the court case was over a year later. I kept having this worry hanging over me for all of that time. What would be the implications? And I kept asking people, you know, I've not got a criminal record, and people kept saying, oh, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. But it doesn't matter if people say to you, don't worry about it, because it's something you've never done before, you're going to worry about it. It's not part of my lifestyle. So I went to court and I was found £260 something. But I spoke well in court. Told them I had never had a criminal record before, told them I'd previously been a business owner. I just didn't agree with the concept of fracking, and I was conscientiously objecting. They weren't interested. They just weren't interested at all. It was legal taught this, legal taught that, and we delayed that business, etc, etc, and they just weren't interested in the reasoning, the conscientious views behind it. They just didn't care. So it was £260 something. We all got fined. I was really lucky at the time. The community around me in my local area came together and paid that for me because they supported me. And I just thought that was absolutely wonderful, and to this day I thank everyone that supported me in that action. And I think it's because of that. It was like a community action. It was full support of my family, full support of the community, and I felt completely right in my actions, and to this day I've never regretted it. I'm quite proud that I did that, and that's why I'm sharing it with you today. We stopped them running for one day. Nothing in the great scheme of things. We didn't stop the fracking in the UK. They faltered, and it was their own fault. I do believe they've extended the licence for another 2 years, so it's possible that could happen again. I'm too old in the tooth now to be going through that all again, but I'm glad that I was there and able to do what I did just that day alone, never mind all the other representation days I did, and to support other people whilst
there was lock-ons every day though.
There was lots of times, not every day, but there was lots and lots of lock-ons. There was lots of people active. Some people did 8, 9, 10 and more, you know. One gentleman actually, well, 4 gentlemen actually went to prison for sitting on top of vehicles. Horrific.
4 days.
4 days in prison. One guy
4 days on top of the wagon.
4 days on top of the wagon. One guy was actually in prison for a couple of months. Horrific, absolutely horrific what they went through for conscientiously objecting.
Michelle done 2 days.
Yeah, a disabled lady we loved the bones of her, my close friend Michelle, wheelchair bound, actually locked on herself and stayed in situ for 2 whole days. Well, no, 36 hours it was actually. Which is absolutely amazing, you know, to do that. And she was so proud of herself, and we all were proud of her. It was fabulous. One friend of ours, Joe Boyd, we call him Joseph Boyd, is his name. He actually did several lock-ons himself over the period of time. He actually conscientiously objected and did lots of actions himself. Well spoken. This guy has a master's degree, and he didn't have any assets. He'd not long left home from his parents' home. Just had a flat. Didn't own any property. Didn't have any major savings. It became available that he could take a court case against Jim Radcliffe. Now, Jim Radcliffe was the owner of Ineos, multi-millionaire, one of the richest guys in the UK, but he actually lived abroad. And Ineos at that time were fracking to use the fuel to make plastics rather than to use it for fuel. So the con that we were actually going to get cheaper fuel was an utter con, because they were actually making plastics with any gas that would have been released from the fracking sites. Anyway, Joe Boyd and another gentleman called Joe Corrie, who happens to be the son of Vivienne Westwood, both went to court. Joe Corrie, Vivienne Westwood's son, actually took 2 or 3 parts of the case on, and Joe Boyd actually took the bulk of the cases on. I can't remember how many segments did he have.
10 of them.
Joe Boyd had 10 segments.
It was against a super injunction. Ineos wanted to bring in.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Wallflower, speak up.
Ineos wanted to bring a super injunction in to stop protesters at any of the sites. And these two went and fought them in court. Joe won all his cases, but Joe Corry didn't win his two. So it was all down to Joe Boyd in the end.
Joe Boyd was the hero. He actually won the cases against this giant, and Joe won. And this is his book. It's called The Road to Kill the Bill, and he actually discusses in this book controlled opposition, which we come across often, self-imposed injunctions made by the controlled opposition. It's a lot for me to go into, and I won't go into in this video, but this book is available on Amazon. I'm not an affiliate, I'm just his friend, and I've lived through this, and I was part of this and saw all of it, and I supported Joe all the way through this. And just as a side, my picture's actually in this book. If I can just quickly show you. That's Joe himself. It's Joe Boyd, who's a wonderful gentleman. That's me. That's me in the book. Some of our friends that helped us. But that's me second in. I don't know how clear the image is. But yeah, this is a full cover of instigators, controlled opposition, Joe's case all the way through, fracking. There's some personal stories about who he is as a person. And I'd highly recommend it. It's really low price. I think it's only around the £3 to £4 mark on Amazon. And you can actually buy it in the digital book
Kindle
format, and a Kindle, that's it, if you have one of those. But yeah, I'd highly recommend it. But yeah, it's 6 years since I did my lock-on. Fond memories, a lot of things whirling around in my mind of those days and those activities, friends, people who are no longer with us anymore. My friend Michelle, who I talked about, disabled lady who did a 36-hour lock-on. She sadly passed at the beginning of COVID. We dearly miss and love her. Another friend, Christine, she passed whilst we were actually protesting there. We've lost several people. Tony was another guy. Lots of people we've lost. Yeah, really good, fond memories, some sad memories, but it's a day of memories. I'll share some photographs of the day. Yeah, I just wanted to share that with you. So I've been arrested once in my life, and this was the day it happened. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining me today. I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.